Hello, this is Tim at Bolin Technology, and do I have a video for you? Dante AV Ultra meets Dante Controller Deep Dive. Now, this isn't a thorough training for Dante Controller. For that, I highly recommend the world-class material available at Audinate.com. They're the experts, it's their software. Instead, think of it as a masterclass for the unique features and settings that Dante AV Ultra brings into Dante Controller. Now, if you're a seasoned audio professional new to Dante AV, there is a whole lot in this video for you. But even if you're a Dante AV Ultra customer, my hope would be that as the manufacturer and having done live demos and live shows, I can bring you some pro tips and best practices that will help you get the very most out of your Dante AV Ultra equipment. So, Dante AV Ultra meets Dante Controller Deep Dive. Are you ready? Let's dive in. Hello everyone. First, thank you for watching this video, but it's a long one, so I want to remind you that there are chapter markers in the description below. So Google will do its thing for YouTube and create those chapters for you. So please feel free to watch the whole thing, but if you're interested in something in particular, please use those chapter markers and jump right to the point that is most relevant to you. Okay, here we go. Okay, the first thing I want to show you is a diagram of the equipment that we're actually using for this Dante AV Ultra Dante Controller Deep Dive. The other thing I want to explain for people who really pay attention is that typically we record these videos in our studio right where all of the equipment is. Today we're remote from that, so that's all the equipment you're seeing, but it's coming from the studio. So here's a diagram for you to see exactly what is showing up in Dante Controller. Okay, let's take a look at the interface. Now we're going to do a top level overview. This isn't a specific Dante Controller training, remember, but I'll go over each of the icons and the tabs, and we'll talk about what each one does. Then we'll dive deeper into the one specific to Dante AV Ultra. So beginning with the upper left, that is your filter pane. It's a really handy place. You can filter the things that you see so that it's easier to manage video subscriptions or audio subscriptions or both, or USB, serial, that sort of thing. This is a place where you can go to make that easier, especially as your network gets really big. Reload does exactly what you think it does. Dante Controller does a great job of auto-discovering your gear. Sometimes things can change on the network, or for other reasons it might be handy to reload it. I'll do it so that you can see what happens. It just simply goes out, repolls all of your network, and loads up all of that equipment. This is the load a preset. Right next to it, save a preset. We're going to do both of those things a little later in the video. This one, configuring your Dante interface. I need to mention you can use Dante Controller over Wi-Fi, but nothing else on your Dante and Dante AV Ultra network devices can be handled that way. Got to use Ethernet. So what we do is just make it easier for ourselves and be on Ethernet to start with. So this is how you choose which interface you use. First time you launch Dante Controller, it's going to ask you to do this. And it's a handy way to check that your card is working correctly and at the speed that you need it to. Clock status. This is turning off or on clock monitoring. Now, you aren't turning off clock monitoring for the entire Dante AV network. No, you're just giving it a priority or not within Dante Controller. So the clock is being monitored all the time. This icon just makes it a higher priority within Dante Controller. This is the group channels, a surprisingly useful setting. So I'm going to use it a little later in the video, and I'll show you how that works. Here is your launch Dante Updater. What we always recommend is you're going to use the standalone Dante Updater anyway when you are occasionally updating the firmware on your Dante or Dante AV Ultra devices. There's a standalone application for that. That's what we always recommend you use. When you download firmware updates from Bolin, that Updater app is included in there. So we always recommend you use that. Dante Activator is, we're not going to cover any of that today, but what it is a way for you to purchase additional audio channels for devices that support that. So you can purchase them with the activator and activate them. And finally, Dante Domain Manager. If you're using Dante Domain Manager, we don't have our server up today, but this is what you use to log in to your Dante Domain Manager. All right, those are the icons across the top. Let's take a look now at the tabs. Routing. You're going to spend a lot of time in the routing tab. I would love to just go over every single thing in here for you, but let's be a little specific for Dante AV, for instance. The first thing I want to mention is these filter transmitters. I can use those to filter down to only the Dante AV Ultra devices that are transceivers. I know they're named, D20 is in the name, so it's very easy for me to filter down through those simply by putting D20 in there. Let's say I wanted to choose our microphone or the mixer maybe. All I have to do is just type a few of those letters and it filters it down to just what I need to see. So here again, you use that to make it easier for you to narrow down a very large network and make the subscriptions that you want to. Just remember to get rid of them when you're finished. Right along in this same section, we have our transmitters across the top, our receivers down the bottom. You can expose all of them at once simply by clicking the plus button. So that's the plus button here. We'll reduce them. Sometimes you want to do that just to give a complete overview of your Dante AV network. That's how you do that. Okay, before we leave the filter tab, I want to show you one other handy trick. Now, the Dante Controller experts will already know this. I'm going to filter for D20 because our transceivers have that in their name, so that now I'm just looking at the Dante AV Ultra transceivers. There's still a lot of channels, but it's a lot less than what it would have been. One handy tip, if you know you need to subscribe to all the channels at once, you can hold down the control key and click the minus button right here. Click and subscribe to them all at once. Now, you might not need to do that very often, but it's a handy tip in case you do. I'm going to unsubscribe from all of those. And let's move on to the next tab. And that's going to be, now remember, you clear these filters when you're finished with them. The next tab is device info. This is a very important place. A lot of helpful information here. Quickly going across from row or column to column. You've got your device name, which, by the way, you can rename all the devices. I'll show you how to do that in a bit. Model name, right? Product version. Now for Bolin, the product version is always going to refer to the firmware for our specific product. So that's one version number. The second one, the Dante version number, will apply specifically to the Dante AV Ultra module that is in our Dante AV Ultra hardware. So that's important to keep in mind. Products get updated occasionally. Features will be added, or other elements within the hardware itself can be smoothed out. And so whenever we update the firmware for our devices, it's going to be available on our website. Here is where you can compare those numbers so you know for sure. Now, Updater is going to tell you what devices have an update for the non-Bolin gear. But for our gear, you get both the information and the update files from our website. Whether or not a device can be locked, it's dependent upon the manufacturer, but you can do that if you've made all the changes that you know you need to and you don't want anybody else undoing those changes. You can lock a device. Primary address is exactly what you think it is. Here's a good time to point out that the Dante AV Ultra network can operate with DHCP. It can operate as link local. It can operate as a DHCP that is sending up link local. Very flexible. Primary link speeds, you always want to give this a check, right? So our Dante AV Ultra gear is operating at 1 gig, exactly like it should. Some of the audio gear that's also on our network, it's operating at 100 megabits. Regardless, it's a helpful thing to check once in a while. Clock status, a lot of helpful information here. You see that all of our sync status is green, exactly like it should be, but this is a great overview for what's happening and the clocking for your Dante AV network, what the source is. In this case, we don't have an external word type clock, GPS clock or word clock. You might in your network, and therefore you've got a clock source that'll be different than Dante. You can see here who the leader is. Now, the Dante AV network decides that. It decides based on all the devices it knows about who it thinks should be the clock leader. Usually, that's fine. It's a good decision. But if in your case you want to promote a specific device to be the clock leader, for instance, that external clock I talked about just a minute ago, this is where you do that. Moving over, I could check here to make this a preferred leader, this particular device. And again, that's up to you. For medium, smaller size networks, you can let Dante figure it out on its own and it will do a good job. Network status, another really handy view within Dante Controller. Now, for those audio professionals, you're going to notice something you've not ever seen before, and that is bandwidth that's way more than what you're used to. For instance, right now, our D220 is sending out 400 plus megabits in the way that it's set, also being received if we had it subscribed. This is a great place for you to look and see what subscriptions are active, what type of bandwidth is going across your network, whether or not the latency status is a problem, and if there are any packet errors. As you can see, we have no packet errors, and we don't have any report of latency problems. So this is all good. Events. Dante Controller keeps up with everything that changes on your network. If clock leaders change, if the sync status changes, all sorts of things. And that is determined by what you choose down here in the lower left. You can choose to see errors, warnings, or everything. Most of the time, I leave it on warnings because that's what I want to know about. You set that to whatever works best for you. Okay, that was section 1. We've reached section 2 for today, and this one is now far more specific to Dante AV Ultra. And let's take a look at how you actually interact with Dante AV Ultra gear using Dante Controller. It's exactly like you would expect. It's point and click in the intersections for the subscriptions you want to make. But let's take a look at a couple of those. All right, I'm going to do a filter again because I want to filter for our camera and our transceivers. And the reason I want to do that is because I want to check the subscription if the camera has one, and if it doesn't, I'm going to make it. So let me expose our camera's channels. Let's talk about that. We'll do it in more detail in the device view, which is my favorite view. That's coming up. But as you can see, the camera has a video flow, 2 audio flows, and an RS422 serial flow. I'm going to show you the specifics of all of that. But right now, what I want to see is, yeah, there is a subscription. So currently, our camera is subscribed to our D20S transceiver. That S stands for SDI. But what if I want that flow to be over here instead? Then I can click in that intersection and make the subscription. Now, eagle-eyed viewers will notice, wait, it didn't drop the subscription here. It simply added another one. Good for you for noticing that. That is a function, as you can see in the tooltip here, of Multicast. I'll show you what that is, where it is, how to make one of those Multicast subscriptions, but that's exactly why it was able to do that. So I'm going to unsubscribe from there, and I'm going to resubscribe what was actually coming into that channel so that you can see the network flow. This is a Blu-ray player down in our studio coming into our encoder. You can see the subscription's already made, but I'll need that to show you later for some network status stuff. Before I leave this routing tab, at least for now, I want to do one other thing to show you the compatibility between Dante AV Ultra and all Dante gear. It's 100% compatible, more than 3,000 devices at the time of this recording. So what I want to do is show you how to subscribe audio from a different source, in this case, the mixer that is in our studio. So I'm going to change this transmitter to reflect the name of the mixer, just because it's a lot easier. So I had channel grouping on. I'm going to turn it off and then back on and show you why. Now I have all of the audio channels for our mixer and our decoders, our receivers, the RX devices. Now, I mentioned again the channel grouping. Here's an time when you might want to use it. I've got channel grouping on now. So instead of all 32 channels at once from our mixer and all of the available channels from our decoder, our RX devices, now I can just expose the ones that I want, to subscribe to. So in this case, I'm going to take channel 1 from our mixer and subscribe it to the left channel of our RX device, our decoder. There you go. And then do the same thing with channel 2. And as you can see, it's very easy. And I've got audio now coming from our Dante-enabled mixer, and happen to be 2 microphones plugged into that. Those now are going to be received at our decoder and then sent out HDMI or wherever else we need them to go. It's that easy to do. So let me undo those. I'll turn channel grouping back off. Okay, so we've taken a look at video and audio. There's more to come, but how about other things that the Dante AV network is capable of handling? And one of those is USB, keyboard and mouse. Think KVM. So you can take a mouse input, a keyboard input, subscribe to it somewhere else on the Dante AV network, and remotely control a PC. Let me mention before I forget, that USB information is bi-directional. So in other words, you don't have to have the inputs at an encoder and the received signal or the remote PC at a decoder. It can be the opposite. You can have a decoder next to you and put the keyboard and mouse into it and receive it somewhere else on the Dante AV network at an encoder or a TX device. You just have to subscribe it at the proper direction. So let me show you how that works. We're going to filter again for our transceivers because it's the easiest thing for me to work with. And in this case, I'll go ahead and start with our TX device with the encoder. And I'm going to open up the filter pane and I'm going to choose Ancillary type USB HID. And as you can see, that drops the options down so that I can see only the devices that have that ability. Just makes it a little more simple. All right, here's our TX device. Here is the USB. So imagine now, at our transceiver, the encoder, the TX, I have a keyboard and a mouse plugged in to USB 1 and USB 2. So on the transmit side now, I'm going to take that USB signal and receive it at our RX device, our decoder. So I'm going to click in that intersection and the subscription is done. So what will happen? That keyboard and mouse plugged in to our TX device in this case will now be received wherever that RX device is, and you use the USB OTG output to control then that PC. But what if instead my remote PC is next to the transmitter and the keyboard and mouse are closer to a decoder? No problem. Remember, the USB signals flow both directions. So let's do that. Let's pretend that our keyboard and mouse are here, right next to our RX device or a decoder, and that the remote PC is right here next to our transmit device or our TX. I simply subscribe the USB keyboard and mouse from our decoder to be received by our transmit device that's right next to the PC. No problem. I simply click right here, subscribe the USB inputs to the USB receive, and there you go. It's that easy. So KVM across the Dante AV network, just remember that your keyboard and mouse is what's being transmitted, and then their inputs are being received next to the remote PC. That's all you have to remember. Then you subscribe it in the direction you need it to go. Okay, one more ancillary type signal I want to go over. We've looked at USB, is serial. Now, what would you need that for? Our cameras, in particular, are PTZ cameras, pan, tilt, zoom. What if you have a PTZ controller or a keyboard that doesn't do VSCA over IP, which the Dante AV network handles, but it does do RS422 serial over IP? That is what this particular connection is for. So since it involves our camera and either a encoder or decoder, a TX or RX device, doesn't matter, just whichever one you have that PTZ controller plugged into. Let's take a look at how you subscribe that one, because this one is a little special. There's our D220. I'm going to filter for our D220. And I had to turn off the ancillary type USB HID. Let me do that back again so that I'm filtering for the D220. It's not showing up. Well, no, because I have an additional filter over here for USB HID, which the camera doesn't support. So I turned that off. There's our camera. So don't panic. If something doesn't show up the way you expect it to, it's probably because you have some filter turned on that doesn't allow it to show up under those conditions. So here's our camera. Let me expose those channels. I see RS422 serial right here. So I can leave this filter where it is. I can narrow it down to serial 2 if I want, but the devices are going to be the same. So let's say that this D20H RX device is where my PTZ keyboard is plugged into. No problem. There are 2 subscriptions you need to make, so let's do them both. The D220 is going to both send and receive PTZ control. So in other words, you're going to send the pan, tilt, or zoom movement from the keyboard itself. The camera needs to let the keyboard know, I heard you and I did it. So there's 2 subscriptions you need to make. Sending RS422 out of the camera into this D20H decoder. Great. But remember, we are now going to need to send the camera's output for RS422. So let me make that change here in the filter, and let's put the transmit decode up there. All right. So for that same RX device now, I need to send its RS422 input into the camera. So transmitting RS422 serial into that same camera. So there are 2 subscriptions. There we go. Let me take the filters off and show you both of them. So here's our D220. Here is our D20H RX. So I've got a serial subscription right there. And I have a second one here, right? So both directions, keyboard plugged into the RX to the camera, camera back to that same RX, closes the loop, makes the communication work. That's all there is to it. Okay, moving right along, and this is one of my favorite things to talk about. We're going to be looking at device view and also multicast. So let's uncheck all of our filters. You can clear them all here. Close that pane. We have nothing filtered here. So device view. Remember earlier I mentioned our camera, the D220, subscribed one time. We made a second subscription and it was able to do it. And I said it was because multicast is on. If you want to check that, you can go back to your filter pane, ask for anything where multicast is already active. And as you can see, there's only one thing that meets that criteria right now, and that's our camera, our D220. So let me remove that. And let me show you exactly how that works. And to do that, I'm going to show you device view, and then I'm going to show you multicast. Now, device view, you can get to multiple ways. I'm going to click here. I can double click the device and open up device view. Or I could click it once, choose devices and device view. And as you can see, there's a keyboard shortcut, Command D on a Mac, Control D on a PC. So now we're looking at device view for our D220. Here's a handy thing to point out as well. This pop-up menu here will quickly let you go from device to device. If you don't know that or you don't happen to notice it, then you're going to always be going back to the routing view and either double-clicking or choosing Command or Control D. But it's much easier and much faster just to use this pop-up menu to go from device to device. So we're going to do a couple of things here. First, let me go through all of the tabs in device view. And we're going to have to do this for more than one device because it changes based on what the device is. All right, here's our D220. It's the camera. Starting with the receive tab, you already know this now, but it can receive RS422 control. What we're looking at here, very helpful information. Serial is connected to a Bolin D20H RX. We did that just a few minutes ago. So that's why this connection is active, and you can see the signal is both being transmitted and received. This is another way for you to know that you did your job correctly. Over here are the available channels, and there aren't going to be many because, again, this is on the receive end of our camera. But what you can tell from this pane is that each of these devices is capable of sending that RS422 serial control, right? Okay, transmit. Now, this is our camera, so it has these abilities. Obviously, the video flow, that's HDMI. And again, that signal is there and present and ready to go. It has 2 channels of audio, left and right. They're not present. So we don't have any audio coming into the camera. That's why they're gray. RS422, again, its status is ready. It can be transmitted, and you already know it is because we've already subscribed it. Right here in this pane is where that multicast flow is. You can tell that we've got one, and the multicast flow is just for the HDMI. We didn't do audio along with it because there wasn't any audio, but we do have a multicast flow going on. I'm going to delete that in just a bit and remake it so that you can see how that works. Status. This is device view, remember. Very handy summary of everything that's important to know about a Dante AV Ultra device. Who makes it, what its product version is, that's the unique firmware to Bolin, 3.1.2 at the time of this recording. What is it? It's Dante AV. These, remember, are the module-specific firmware numbers, software numbers. So they're different than our product number because that's Bolin. This is specific to Audinate's piece in Dante AV Ultra. Mute, this is the clock synchronization. You don't want it muted because then it's not going to be synchronized. So unmuted is correct. Is the sync status locked? Yes, it is. Earlier, you saw the clock status view. In fact, let me just rewind back to that and show you. The sync column is what that table in device view is referring to. So all of our devices are locked. So that's why it reads locked. We don't have an external word clock or a GPS clock. And this device, the D220, is not the preferred leader. So that is no. Frequency offset. Now, this is interesting. That ppm is parts per million. This is something that the Dante network does on its own. Dante devices, Dante AV Ultra devices, PTP, Precision Time Protocol, part of its special sauce is that constant monitoring of who's the leader and how far ahead or behind a device is. In this case, the Dante network decided that our camera needed to be -8 parts per million off of the leader. That's not a lot, but you'll notice as we go through different devices, that number may change. This is all, again, automatic. You don't have to do anything about it, but it is what makes Dante AV Ultra very special because this clocking is done constantly on the network. And the interface on the camera is good. It's running at 1G, IP address, MAC address, what the utilization is, right? That's the network status, all right here in this handy spot. Latency, empty, it's blank. There's a reason for this. And this gets really confusing for Dante professionals who are audio pros. They're used to seeing something here. For instance, if I change over to a speaker, this is an audio device. And the reason we have the graph now is that that's what it draws. The latency that it's drawing is audio latency. Currently, time of this recording, there is no way to do this with the video flow. Audinate's aware of that. We've talked to them about it. It's a feature I think they're looking at, but you will not see it on the video side. So again, for audio pros, this can be a little unsettling because the initial thought is it doesn't work. Well, of course it does. It's just not going to display a graph like you're used to seeing the way audio devices do. So let's go back to our camera. So you remember no receive connections. Of course it's receiving, it's sending its flow. It just can't monitor audio from a video flow. Device configuration. This is a great tab. You'll notice all of our devices are named by what they are. And for us, we just chose names that would be meaningful for our particular situation. You can change whatever, name it whatever you want to. And the way you do that is right here, device view, device config. And I'm going to do that for you right now. That 02262A it's a meaningful number for us here at Bolin. It's not going to be meaningful to you. So I'm just going to delete that. I am going to put Bolin, just because I want to, D220. Now for me, that's good enough because I know exactly what it is. But for you, what if you need to know that this particular D220 is CAM1? I can just add that information. Now notice over here on the left-hand side, that name hasn't changed yet. I'm going to click apply. A couple of interesting things are going to happen. I'm going to get this warning. Renaming a device breaks existing audio routes to other devices. Are you sure you want to rename it? Well, for one thing, remember there aren't audio subscriptions anyway, but they are going to be restored. If they did exist, they would be restored after the name is changed. So I'm going to click yes. And let's watch over here at the left and see what happens. There we go. Bolin D220, CAM1. Simple as that. And the subscriptions are all established, maintained, no problem, but it now has a meaningful name. That's how you do that. Quickly going through the rest of this tab, sample rate you can't change on this device. That's why it's grayed out. It also doesn't have a sample rate pull up, so that can't be changed. The encoding is what it is. Unicast delay requests. This is a deep dive feature specific to Dante Controller. Let me just explain that you've got a clock leader, clock followers. A person, an administrator, does have the option to report at a more active level follow requests, delay requests to that leader. Now, you have to be sure that your leader device can support it, but you can turn this on and it changes the way that that request is sent. And it changes it from multicast to unicast. So it's a little less traffic on the network. Again, on a medium to small Dante AV Ultra network, I don't think this is something you're going to need to do. But since this is a Dante AV Ultra and Dante Controller deep dive, I needed to mention it. Latency. Now, this is the latency of the particular device itself, not the latency of the video signal. It's the latency involved in sending the signal. It sounds a little confusing, but I needed to mention it because it isn't quite what you think it is. The latency for the video signal is a function of the lens, the sensor in our camera, the lens, the sensor, the processing, getting it onto the network, sending it across. That's a different value. This is within the device itself. We have it set to 1 millisecond. That works really well. I think I would just keep it there. Next, we have the audio video sync tab. Now, I want to explain what's going on here and how it applies to the entirety of the Dante AV Ultra network. Because remember, the whole purpose of Dante AV is perfect synchronization between video and audio. So let me explain what's going on right here on the D220. This is the device view we're looking at. Audio video sync, what you're always adjusting is the audio delay. Now, video professionals will know this very well because audio always wins. In the race across the Dante AV network, audio is a lighter signal. It doesn't take nearly as much bandwidth, so it's always going to get there first, ahead of that big video feed. So what you're adjusting then is the amount of delay you need to give the audio to perfectly synchronize it with the video. What I want to point out here is that it is device specific, which is going to be great in a minute, but on the camera in particular, you would be adjusting the audio delay for its direct audio inputs. If you'll remember, when we looked at the transmit tab, we weren't sending any audio signals. So in this particular case, there's really nothing to adjust. If we were, then in this device config tab, we would adjust that audio here. Now, in the overall scheme of Dante AV Ultra, that adjustment is going to be made in a different place, depending on how your network is configured and all the devices that you have on it. So let me just mention one scenario. You have our cameras, you have multiple ones of them, and you have audio coming from a Dante mixer or two, depending on your setup. And then you're going to be sending that audio and video feed up to big screens in the main house. And you're going to do that with encoders and decoders. Now, the encoder, the transmit device that is going to take the video signals from our cameras and the audio signals from other places and combine them to send up to the screen. Now, there is where that audio video sync is really important, and that's where you'll make it. So you're going to be adjusting for the main audio feed synchronized up with the video feed. So coming back to our D220 here, this delay is not going to change the audio video sync going up to the main house. That will be done at the transmit device that is sending that final feed up. So hopefully that's clear. The audio video delay is how you get perfect synchronization, because you only need to make it at one point where the encode is happening going to the main screens. And then all of those screens are going to be perfectly timed. So hopefully that makes sense. And finally, on this tab, reset device. Sure, you need these features occasionally. Equipment is equipment. But I just want to caution you that clear config does exactly what you think it does. It clears all of your changes, all the configurations you've made. It's a rare thing when you're going to need to do that. You might need to, certain power fluctuations and all sorts of anomalies can create interesting issues. And so it might be necessary at some point. So I want you to know where that can happen and how you do it. Same with rebooting the device. That might happen a little more often, just depending. We leave these up for days. But if you need to reboot a device, you can do it from within Dante Controller, a Dante AV Ultra device. Now we move to the Video Config tab, one of my favorite tabs. So a whole lot of information here. And for you audio professionals, this is brand new. Well, a lot of things have been new up to this point, but you've never seen a video tab before because Dante AV Ultra didn't exist until just 2 years ago. So we have video reference settings, HDCP settings, compression settings, HDMI, HDCP status. A nice summary. So let's go over what each of these means. Video resolution currently is set to auto. And frankly, almost all the time, that's going to be your best setting. There are a couple of cases where you might want to make a change here. But for now, video resolution set to auto also means that EDID is going to function correctly. The EDID will be in full handshake mode from video transmit device to video receive device across the Dante AV network. When you choose something other than auto, one of the things that you change is that EDID exchange. It will be dropped and the video will do what Audinate calls a best effort to send the signal or to match what's on the other end. Now, if you know exactly what you have, it should be no problem. But changing this can sometimes cause errors if there's something, it's an older display, there just could be all kinds of things. So like I said, for the most part, auto is a good practice. We'll make a change in just a minute, and I'll show you what happens to that signal and to its bandwidth. Right now it's on auto, so all of this information is also auto. HDCP, this is your copyright protection for high bandwidth digital video sources. So it's fully licensed across the Dante AV Ultra network. So auto, again, is usually your best bet. If it's an HDCP signal, the device will sense that, encode it correctly, decode it correctly on the other side. But you do have two other options. Let's look at them. HDCP 1.x, it's usually going to be 1.4. It is there because you may often encounter older devices, older PCs, older media players that are way prior to HDMI 2.0 and are sitting at 1.4. Typically, auto captures that, does the job that it needs to. If for some reason it doesn't, then that's what this option is for, HDCP 1.x. And then, of course, no HDCP. Again, auto usually does that correctly. But if you, for some reason, need to just manually turn HDCP off, you can do that per device in this video config tab. We're going to leave it at auto for now because it's a camera signal. It's not sending HDCP anyway. Compression settings. This is important. So let's explain what they are. Broadcast means that the image quality is always going to be prioritized over latency. So it's going to be willing to sacrifice latency, in other words, a little more, in order to send the most pristine image possible. Ultra low latency is the opposite. It's going to prioritize latency, the lowest it can possibly do, over the image. But notice I didn't say over the quality of the image, and this is important. JPEG 2000 is a beautifully efficient codec. It is visually lossless. And our experience is that choosing ultra low latency, which is the name of the game, you want the lowest latency possible, works just fine. The image looks beautiful, and it's prioritizing low latency. So our guidance is use ultra low latency. It will give you the best result. Video stream bandwidth cap. It is not enabled now. I'm going to enable that in another device where it'll be a little more dramatic, and I can show you what it does. I'll do that with the Blu-ray player. The HDMI HDCP status is a really wonderful summary. This is a valid signal. That's good. It's a non-HDCP signal because it's a camera, so it doesn't have HDCP. It's going out. There is no HDCP version. It's at 1080p, 1920 1080, sending 422 color space at 12-bit. And let's take a look. It's occupying roughly 470 megabits across this network. So we're going to leave that right where it is. So again, your video config tab, I'll just show you what this other information is. I'll choose 1080p so that you can see that that summary is correct. It's sending 422 at 12-bit. It did that in auto. That's why these two match. So I'll go back to auto, and we'll just leave it where it is for now. Serial config. This is important in that serial communication that we talked about earlier when we made those subscriptions from camera to device and device to camera, whichever one the keyboard controller, PTZ controller was directly connected to. If you're used to serial communication, then all of these make total sense to you. The baud rate, data bits, parity, stop bit. The important thing for you to know is they have to match. So the keyboard PTZ controller you're using is going to have settings that are baud rate, data bits, parity, and stop bits. They have to match. And here is where you can make those changes if you need to. If it isn't 9600 but something else, same with the data bits, same with the parity, same with stop bits. Now this is standard, so that's why it's set this way. But here is where you make the changes necessary to do RS422 PTZ control over the Dante AV network if they differ from what is standard here. That's where you make those changes. Network config is probably the easiest tab to go over. This is where, if you need to set a manual IP address for these devices, you can do it right here. We have it set to obtain an IP address automatically. That works really well for us. It really depends on your network and your IT managers, but the network config tab is where you can manually set an address if you need to. You also have clear config and reboot here. They apply to all these settings. So that's all of the tabs in device view. But before I leave it, let's go back and change to a different device, because as I mentioned at the start of this section, the device view changes, the information does, based on what the device is. So let's choose a transmitter for a minute. Now look, we'll go to the receive one first, and you can see that on the receive side of a transmitter and encoder, it can receive that USB signal that we subscribed to earlier, infrared across the Dante AV Ultra network, and serial communication. That's what it can receive. And as you see, it has a USB subscription. I think I just mentioned that we'd already done. It's connected. Everything's good. That's what that means. On the transmit side, now this is different than the camera. The camera all had video, 2 audio channels, and RS-422 serial. The transmitter encoder is capable of much, much more. That's why you see you've got a video signal. You have up to 8 channels of audio. Currently, as you can see, we're using left and right for some content down in the studio. We're not using the rest of them. That's why they're gray. And we have USB, IR, and serial that are available for transmit. Let's take a look at status. Same information, just as it applies to this particular device. And let's take a look at that frequency offset. You'll notice it's a little different than what the camera was -8 parts per million. This one is -12. That is the beauty of PTP and the network timing doing its thing for you. Latency, remember, this is a video device, so it's not going to draw a latency graph for you. It can only do that for the audio signal. Device config, this one is the same with one major thing I want to point out. Again, you can rename it however you want to. Sample rate, this matters for the audio on the rest of your network. In our case, we're using 48K, so that's why we have it set that way. This device doesn't have a sample rate pull-up, so it can't do that. PCM24 is what we chose. Unicast, we don't have that on. This device is set to 5 milliseconds as a hard latency. This works well. You remember the camera was at 1. The transceivers by default are at 5. We don't normally have to change that. There may be a scenario or two where you do, but I think for the most part, leaving it where it is fine. But let's look at audio video sync. You remember I mentioned on the D220 that you're always delaying the audio. That's what the audio video sync is doing. And I indicated that for the camera itself, since we weren't using its internal audio, there wasn't any reason to make an adjustment there. This would be a little different. In the Dante AV network and its overall scheme, at some point, you're going to have an encoder sitting in front of the path directly to those screens, whatever they are, large screens, smaller screens, whatever they are, 2, 4, 6. At that encode point is the key to getting that lip sync perfect. So you do make the adjustment here, and it is based on what you see in here. The fantastic part about the way Dante AV works is that you're adjusting it on the ingest side so that one adjustment affects all of the subscribed endpoints. They will be perfectly time locked to the subframe, every endpoint. And where you adjust it is at that transmit stage going out to those screens. So in this case, if in our network deployment, this was the device that was going to send the video and audio up to those main screens, we would make the adjustment here. We'd make it once and it would be perfectly locked. Clear config, reboot, those are the same things. So use them if you have to, but don't if you don't. Video config, very much like the camera was, and for the very same reasons. You can adjust what the incoming signal is. Now, on this transmitter, I happen to know that it is a Blu-ray. So let's take a look for a minute. You'll see that that Blu-ray signal is not taking up very much space, not nearly as much bandwidth as it should. And I'm going to show you why. I think you've already seen it, but I'll get to it here in a second. I've got this in auto, remember. So it's doing its handshaking like we want it to, and it has already figured out what the signal is. HDCP version is on auto, and that's good because it's a Blu-ray. That is HDCP content. So it's encoding it correctly. It's decoding it correctly. Notice I've got ultra-low latency chosen here. And notice I have video stream bandwidth cap enabled. And I have that cap set to 500 megabits. Let's look again at the network status. This is how that Blu-ray signal is only occupying, well, less than 500 megabits. It's almost like magic. The signal looks beautiful, but how big would it be actually? Well, it'd be bigger than 500 for sure. This is a good time to mention Dante AV Ultra, per specification, has an internal cap of 700 megabits anyway. That is so that you can leave the 30% headroom you need on a 1G port. So the hardware does a 700 megabit cap all on its own. But this Blu-ray would take up that entire bandwidth. I'll show you. Well, let's look at the summary down here. That's a valid HDCP signal, because it is. It's going out, it's being transmitted. Here's the version, 2.x. Here's the signal, 2160 P60, right? 16 by 9, 422, 12-bit. It's a beautiful signal. Now, let me disable bandwidth cap. I haven't saved it yet, but let me show you. 497 roughly, it's under 500. Now I'm going to save this. Let me show you. Auto, ultra low latency, no bandwidth cap, same signal, but it is now occupying pretty near that 700 megabit cap. It's a big signal. Well, that's fine, actually. Our switch is a Netgear M4250 in the Pro AV line. It can handle it just fine. But what if we don't need to send quite that much bandwidth? We actually don't. Visually, I demonstrate this all the time. This Blu-ray looks beautiful, and it looks exactly the same when I enable a bandwidth cap. In this case, I chose 500. We've experimented. We've taken it all the way down to 300 something. But 500 is a good number. I'm going to re-enable that. Now watch over here, the subscription, you can see it. It will have to renegotiate this signal, but as soon as it does, with this new limitation, there's the subscription, valid again, and look, we are now under 500 megabits. Now, why would you do this? Again, you would do it because you can, and because it just saves a little bit of bandwidth on your network. And all IT professionals know that the more you can save, the better you are. So I want you to be aware that feature exists. It exists for a reason, and it's really, really useful. Serial config, exactly the same as we described earlier for the same reasons. Network, also exactly the same. We're using DHCP, so no changes to make here. Let me go over these icons because I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to switch back to my camera because I promised a look at Multicast. Reload, you've already seen. The Dante AV Ultra devices have, the camera has its own web view from a browser. So it isn't supported within Dante Controller. This one is identified device. Now on a small network, you might not ever need to do it. But if you have multiple things like multiple cameras, multiple encoders, decoders, and you didn't label them for some reason, or you didn't name them to help you know exactly where they should be, or maybe somebody moved it, you can turn on identify and it will blink a particular LED. You can look that in the quick start guide or the manual for sure and figure and know which one it is. And it will identify which device this actually is. So it's a handy feature. Here's our multicast icon. So I'm going ahead and click it. This is what you do when you want to create a multicast flow. But remember, we already have one. So what I'm going to do first is go to the Transmit tab. This is our D220 camera. Here is that HDMI multicast flow we saw before. I'm going to delete it. And when I click delete, this warning is important because it's telling us, hey, you have this subscribed to a device already. Deleting the flow mid-production is going to cause glitches because it will. It has to renegotiate and recreate the unicast flow. Now, it will do that, and it will do it successfully. But the reason you're getting this warning is this is not a change you want to make in a live situation. So I'm going to go ahead and click yes. Notice the subscription got dropped, but then quickly re-enabled. So that signal is being transmitted and received and displayed. But now we are in a point where I can make a multicast flow. So let's do it. We'll go back to the multicast tab because this is how simple it is. Choose which one you want, in this case HDMI, it's going to make a new flow already, so I don't have to add it to a new flow. But why is that there? Because you can have a multicast flow that is just video, then you can later choose to add the audio to that same flow. And if that's what you want to do, you just check them here. It's going to make a new flow because it didn't have one before, right? But in this case, I just want the HDMI, so I'm going to click Create, and there it is. Notice it dropped the subscription again, but quickly reestablished it because now we have a multicast flow, one camera going to potentially multiple places, up to the limit of your switch or switches. That's why we always recommend that 10 gigabit a second uplink between switches so that you have all kinds of room to play with in a 1G network scheme. So that's it. It's as simple as that. Here is that show hide channel group option again, and lock unlock. You can do that in a couple places. Remember, in device view, but also here. So that's what these do. And that is a deep dive into device view. Before we leave, just for fun, let's look at something totally different that is not a Dante AV Ultra device, just so you can see they still give you the same information, just without the video piece. So once again, back to our camera. Actually, I want to show you one more thing before we leave it. If I'm at my decoder now, this is one of our RX devices, and let's say I want to receive a channel from my Audio Technica mic that is also on my network. A couple of ways I can do that. One of them is right here. I can take this mic channel and just drag it right over here and subscribe it just like that, right? It's exactly the same as doing it within routing view, but since I'm right here, I can just subscribe it just by drag and drop. And by the same token, I can delete it by clicking it and pressing delete. Simple as that. So multiple options for how to make or unmake subscriptions. Okay, so in summary, I want to go over a couple of things. One of them, I'm going to go back to routing view, and I want to just re-emphasize the compatibility between Dante AV Ultra and 3000 plus at the time of this recording Dante devices. So once again, let me go to the audio devices. I've got my Audio Technica microphone here, and I have two decoders. I'm going to choose the D20S for now. And I'm going to subscribe the microphone to the left and right channels of my decoder. And as you can see, that subscription is made. I could speak into that microphone. The decoder would marry that with the video output of that HDMI and send it out to my device, my screen, my television, or wherever I was routing that signal. Same thing with our mixer. Yeah, let me just do channel grouping again just for fun. I remember I had two channels on my Dante mixer. Let's go to a different decoder, this one, this RX, and here are my audio channels. I'm going to take output 1 of my mixer, which is a boom mic, and I'm going to take output 2, which is a lav mic, and I have those subscribed to a decoder. So as you can see, we have two decoders with two different audio inputs. Our D20S is receiving the Audio Technica output, and our D20H is receiving the output from our Dante mixer. So clearly, you can see how easy it is to combine Dante AV Ultra video with Dante audio from multiple sources because they all work seamlessly together to be perfectly timed, making that slight adjustment to the audio delay at the final encode point like we talked about. Easy as that. So a couple other things. Best practices. Remember, we talked about multicast and how in the video world, multicast is a best practice. It turns on IGMP packet snooping, and you do want switches that support that. Having a multicast video flow means IGMP will be doing its job, and it makes it possible for you to take one flow and subscribe it to multiple places. So you'll remember we had our D220, I'll filter for that, and our D20 receivers, let's do the RX, or excuse me, the D20H. I'll look at the HDMI signal, and I'm going to subscribe our camera's flow to the D20H and the D20S at the same time. We did this a little earlier, but oops, I'm going to do it again just so that you can see I can have that signal going to multiple places at once. So here it is in the D20S, and here it is in the D20H. And that's because we have multicast on. It's taking care of that. Another best practice, in our device tab, device config, name the device something that's meaningful and will help you know where it is for a multitude of reasons. But maybe the most important one is, so when you're within the routing view of Dante Controller, it just makes it much easier to subscribe, make those subscriptions where you want them to go. Video config, video resolution, usually auto is your best friend. Same with HDCP. Remember, ultra low latency is our guidance for the Dante AV Ultra devices. That image is still beautiful and pristine, but it's going to do its very best to keep that latency as low as possible. And then this summary. Serial and network, pretty self-explanatory. Now I'm going to have one more thing before we go. Remember, delete your filters if you don't need them. I am going to give you an example of making a preset and then loading it. So I'm going to save a preset for what I have right here with, let me make a couple of changes. Let me just save it as it is. I'm going to save a preset. Most of the time, you don't need every single thing in every single preset. So for instance, this laptop, I don't need, I do have subscriptions for everything else in this list, so I'm going to leave it. But I highly, highly recommend clicking on the Advanced tab. If you just save that, you'll get a really awesome preset, but it's going to be way more than you actually need depending on what's important. So all of these are checked, as you can see. I'm going to choose none, and I'm going to choose the ones that I really, really have to have for this preset. I want the name. I want the sample rate. I want the TX flows and the RX flows for sure. The address is fine. I can have it or not because my network's not going to change, but I'm going to do it just to be sure. So these apply to my particular situation. You choose the ones that fit best for what you've done, the configurations you've made. But my guidance is choose the ones you need because it's going to make it much faster to load, much faster. So here we're going to click Save. I'm going to use a name I already have, Dante Controller Deep Dive Subscriptions. I'm going to click Save. Since I already have the file, I'm going to let it overwrite it. Let me show you how it works because it doesn't look like it did anything. I'm going to unsubscribe the HDMI signal to my D20H, right? I'm going to unsubscribe my Audio-Technica microphone also. Oops, there we go. Okay, so I've taken the audio subscription off. I've removed one of the camera subscriptions. And just for fun, let's take off one of the speaker outputs from our Blu-ray player. I'm just going to remove it. There it is. It's gone. Oh no, I need all of this stuff back. Well, I probably can remember because I've done it a few times. I can remember what all those were, but if you have a more complex network or you simply want to trust your presets to do what they need to do because you need to change it from scenario to scenario, that's what presets are for. So someone else has come along behind me and they've set up the studio for what they needed. Now I need to go back to work, but I want it back to where I left it. No problem. I'm going to go to Load Preset, choose the one, well, I just made it, but I could have made it a week or two or three or months ago. Open, Here it's going to confirm. It wants me to confirm these were the choices I made. Yep, these are the roles that it's going to affect. Those are my target devices. Yes, they are. So I am going to click OK. Now this does take a few seconds, but we saved time by choosing only what we actually needed and the devices we actually needed. We're almost finished. And you will see subscriptions placed, restored, and set exactly where they're supposed to be. Sample rate takes a bit. Now there's our RX labels, our receive labels. Next comes the TX labels, the flows. And we're almost finished. I'm letting you see this in real time. Almost there. There we go. It's going to create the subscriptions. Look at this. They're all going to be back where they should be. It says it's complete. We did have one error. Let's see what that is. The serial. That's interesting. Usually works just fine, but that's okay. This is live. Notice though, my audio is back. My HDMI for the camera right here is back in both places, exactly like it's supposed to. RS422, the serial, that's an interesting glitch, but it's easy to fix. I think overall, you get the idea that presets are some of your best friends. And it is the way you can most easily go from configuration to configuration to configuration without having to manually redo everything all at once. I know I said finally, but there is one more thing. I want to show you quickly how subscribing Dante AV Ultra to Dante Studio software works. So we're going to filter for our camera, the D220. You can see the HDMI flow is available in Dante Studio. So I'm going to make the subscription from the camera. Okay, subscription made. And now I'm going to show that to you in OBS. So you're looking at a sidewall in our studio in another part of the building. That's some of the foam in the edge of a Fostech speaker. And it's as simple as that. Wow, this was a fun video to make, and I sincerely hope that you learned something. If you did, consider leaving a comment below. And if we missed a feature, you can let us know that too. If you're part of the Boland family, then I want to say thank you. And if you're not, I hope that you soon will be. Please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel and turning on the notifications so you'll know when we release new content like this. It's always a pleasure to spend the time with you. Thank you for watching. I'm Tim at Boland Technology, and I will see you in the next video.